Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Ina Maybon from plutoniumastrology.com. And today I want to go over the astrology for the month of July 2022. And let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock here. I'll share screen so we can see the transits now. The first transit of the month, like it's been for a couple of months now, is actually occurring before we even get to July. It's happening on June 28th, which is today, the day that I'm actually recording the video, and we are talking about the new moon in Cancer. Now, what is going on at the same time is this pair of luminaries is actually making a square back to Jupiter that you can see right here. And there is also a sextile between the benefics. So Jupiter is playing quite an interesting role in this configuration of planetary alignments. So let's just break down what the new moon in Cancer is all about. So this is a very interesting new moon because of one particular reason. Now, the moon in ancient astrology was said to rule the sign of Cancer. So out of all of the 12 new moons that we experience during the annual year here, we only get one of those new moons actually where the moon itself is the ruler of the sign that it is occurring in. So I think that that is really unique. So this is one of the most interesting lunar cycles of the year, in my opinion. And that is because the moon is playing the host to the sun. So not only are they coming together like they always do at the time of the new moon, and we can see things that represent the beginning of a new lunar phase or cycle, a new seed, as it's often called, you know, the new seed of an idea or of a month of experiences that we're about to represent in the unfolding of the sign of Cancer as it goes through for that 30 days or so. But the cycle begins with the moon playing the host to the sun, which is very unusual in my opinion. So what is the sign of Cancer really representing? What is the new seed that is happening at this time? So a new seed is always between the luminaries representing something that could have to do with your purpose or your intentions or your ambitions, which is represented by the sun, and the moon, which can represent the environment or circumstances or sort of an allotment of fate or a roll of the dice. So what we're saying is that the purpose that you're seeing for yourself at this time and the environment, somehow they kind of come together and act in unison, and there is a new sense of beginning a new cycle. Now, we're very used to these cycles, so these types of cycles are very, very subtle. And when we are talking about the sign of Cancer, this is the sign that the sun reached the culminative declination in the sky at the summer solstice, and then sort of begins to head back down towards the earth and away from the pole star. So it's as if the purpose is trying to get back down to something that is material or material based, and not really in a derogatory sense, just in the sense that before the summer solstice, that sun represents an ideal that keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. And that is represented by the arc of the sun rising in declination more and more each day, which is why we get the longest and hottest time of the year for the northern hemisphere, that is. So that climb of that solar arc represents some sort of ideal of success or goal or ambition, because the sun is always representing those things. And as it gets to the culminative end moment in Gemini and then hits the summer solstice, Cancer is the moment where that arc starts to head back down towards the earth. Now, in ancient astrology, they called this the entrance of spirit into matter, or the return of spirit coming down into matter. So Cancer really has to do with the sign of people returning in some way or another. And I really love this. So there's a sense of returning. Returning to what? Well, that really is up to you. That really is exactly how you can imagine it for yourself. It might be a nostalgia around returning home, returning to family. For other people, it might be just a sense of returning to something that is more grounded within themselves. But this lunar cycle is really about somehow we return, and it has something to do with groundation. It has something to do with materialistic existence, not really in the derogatory sense, but just in the sense that we live in a world where we're navigating material reality and existential questions of material existence. We were born, we go through life, we decay, we age, we're subject to the forces of materiality one way or another, right? And Cancer represents a time where we sort of can come back down to ourselves in a sense, or we are pulling back down our ambition to something that's more grounded. It can have a lot to do with us remembering what it is exactly that really has a very important meaning to us in our lives, that brings us home in one sense or another. And that is really what this seed is all about. So it's a very unique seed for the time of year in the sign of Cancer here. Now, the aspects that are making direct association with this new moon is going to be this sextile between Jupiter and Venus, and also between Jupiter and the sun by square, the sun and moon by square. So what does this mean? Well, let's tackle the Jupiter square luminary aspect first. So a square is of the nature of Mars. So generally we think of it as either action or a type of challenge or conflict. So there is something about this Jupiter in Aries that is having to do with something at least challenging to some degree. So it could be that Jupiter is representing something that we're trying to initiate, and perhaps we're doing it in a very zealotous or moralistic kind of sense. This can cause conflict to elements in our lives or situations in our lives. An example of this might be where we're trying to initiate something out in the world, perhaps, but we also feel that we're trying to return home in some way or another. And there's a little bit of a hard understanding. How do we do both at the same time? It could be that somebody is being kind of domineering to us in a moralistic sort of way. Somebody's ideologies or somebody's belief systems can manifest in this transit and be a little bit abrasive to us when we're just trying to return back to more of a sentimental type of a position. So we also have Jupiter making that sextile to Venus. Now, what I've really been noticing so far about this is that people seem to have been just doing a lot more socializing, going to parties. And oftentimes it's interesting, I think, that people are going and doing social activities that somehow draw in an element of a game or maybe of a sport. You're talking probably parties, social situations. Now, I do think that in terms of the political events that are happening right now in the country, if you're an American, you're going to see a little bit of this dynamic potentially bringing people together, especially for a moralistic cause. And I think that we could definitely see that playing out right now. So that's the new moon. So the new moon has this tension built into it from Jupiter that can be a little bit moralizing or a little bit of a stricter authoritarian, especially in Aries. But also we're getting this very fun loving, sporty kind of game loving, socializing aspect between the benefics Jupiter and Venus here. So that's how we start out the month. Now, if we cut ahead now to we go a couple of days ahead to the very, very end of the month, June 30th, we begin to see that Saturn and Mercury form a trine together here. So we've got Saturn now going retrograde, but in a mental air sign, and we have Mercury also in his own domicile in a mental air sign. So this obviously is going to point to probably ideas and communication. But with Saturn in Aquarius, I always think of Saturn in Aquarius as being that maverick contrarian almost, where there is going to be kind of a dualistic type of thinking or a futuristic progressive type of thinking that's going to kind of bounce back and forth. So it's a little bit of a contrarian energy, and especially when it's going retrograde. So there could be ideas or conversations or topics. Maybe you're at a party and there's a political conversation comes up, and we're getting into some of these ideas, especially since the political atmosphere is so charged lately. So there's kind of an example of that. But because these two planets are in a trine, that suggests that the conversations that we're having about our ideologies can potentially find support or can potentially work out good. Where in other cases, if you bring up religion or politics in social situations, that's kind of like a party foul. But I think in this situation, that trine represents that if we are having ideas, if we're discussing ideologies, if we're in social situations where we're maybe thinking a little bit outside of the box, that we actually get support from that at that time. So this might be a really good time for you to talk with friends about things you might not normally talk about, because there could be some surprising support coming from friends or associations at this time, or your family or your partner or something like that. So that is a very positive aspect that is happening right before the very beginning of the month here. Now, if we go forward to July 4th, otherwise known in America as 4th of July, we start to get a sextile forming between Mars and Mercury. Okay, and Mars is still in this square with Pluto, as you can see here. So by the time we get to 4th of July here, what kind of action are we having? If you're in America and you're doing fireworks, if you have the money to even buy fireworks this year, I'm not sure that I'm going to, because I love fireworks, but with the economy the way it is, I'm trying to save some money now. But you can see this sextile formed between Mars and Mercury at the very late degrees, extremely late degrees. I mean, we're within arc minutes of both of these planets doing sign changes into the preceding sign here. But there is still this square between Pluto and Mars hanging on. So I would say right off the bat, you do want to be careful if you are doing fireworks, because Pluto Mars things is explosive already. So, and Mars can represent injuries or accidents. So I would say just be really careful with your fireworks, because there is that potential in the air to sort of have an accident and while you're having fun. Now, one thing that is just absolutely fascinating here about this Mercury Mars sextile is that if you go forward just even one day, by July the 5th, you can see that Mercury has ingressed into Cancer and that Mars has ingressed into Taurus. Because these two planets are ingressing and they do so while they hold that sextile together, that is a really, really unusual thing to happen in charts. I can't really remember the last time I even saw two planets holding an aspect with one another as they both did a sign change. Usually one will make a sign change and it will technically still be in the aspect, but in ancient Hellenistic astrology techniques, we say that the whole sign aspect between those planets has now changed because they're in different whole signs, and technically they're in a degree-based aspect still, but it's a little bit of a washed out aspect at that point to some degree. But these two planets, they maintain the whole sign sextile between themselves as they sign change, and then they're still in a whole sign aspect with one another. And they also maintain a degree based aspect as they sign change. So I think that this really could represent something that feels like a pretty big speed bump. I feel like it will be noticeable. It'll feel kind of like a boom, like you can go over a speed bump a little too fast. I feel like it's going to have something like that. So we're going to get Mercury moving into the sign of Cancer. We're going to get Mars moving into the sign of Taurus. Now, both planets, here's where the interesting part comes in. Both planets previously would be in their own temples. Mars would be in his own temple in Aries, Mercury in his own temple in Gemini. So as we see the sign change, both planets lose dignity. And what we say in ancient astrology is that they're losing dignity. They're moving out of their own domiciles. And this is a status change that is not as good as it was. So there's some representation of something kind of downgrading a little bit. With Mercury, this could have something to do with communications. It could have something to do with the markets or with money. With Mars, it could have something to do with your willpower or your ability to get things done, to initiate projects. Both of these planets become a slightly more frustrated version of themselves when they're not in their own temples and they get downgraded. So we're going to talk a little bit about Mars in Taurus here when we go through the conjunction that is coming up at the end of the month. Now, the sextile is of the nature of Venus. So even though there's a downgrade of a sign change, we are saying that these two planets still maintain a reference point that is at least trying to bring things together in a harmonious way. So Mars is trying to get things done in a harmonious way, becomes a little bit maybe unsure or passive aggressive. Mercury is trying to be articulate and expressive to people when he needs to communicate so that he can help Mars get things done. But there's a little bit more emotionality involved with mental processes, perhaps. But Mercury is still trying to stay connected with getting the project done one way or another. So it's still a beneficial aspect, but it is just a very interesting dynamic because they change signs at the same time while holding that aspect. So all right. So now if we go forward to, let's go forward to July the 6th now. Okay, just one day later. And we are arriving at the first quarter moon, and the moon is holding a trine to Venus, who is actually the domicile ruler of the sign that the moon is in. So you can see here that the moon and the sun are in this separating square, and the separating square is the first quarter moon. So there is a whole sign square between these two signs of Cancer and Libra. But what is really, really good about this first quarter moon, I actually have a really good feeling about this because the domicile ruler or the host lord of the sign that the moon is in is ruled by Venus. So Venus is in Gemini, and Venus is the dispositor of the first quarter moon. Let's break down what the first quarter moon is. First quarter moon is a time that we have to differentiate ourselves a little bit from the new moon. So at the time of the new moon, where things are so new and undifferentiated, the purpose and the environment or the circumstance and what you're imagining for yourself, it's so close together because this is a brand new cycle that there isn't a lot of differentiation between those two things. The first quarter moon represents a time where things begin to peel apart a little bit, and it's a call to action. It's a call that says, let's build something right now. The circumstances may be changing and they're always in flux. We understand how we want to go forward and we need to get stuff done. So I call the first quarter moon the builder moon. It's a moon that is almost like an Aries moon. It takes a lot of action and it wants to get stuff done, and it's not afraid to delineate responsibility and to just get stuff done. But it can be a little bit conflictual. It can rub people the wrong way. In any case, this moon is all about building something and tackling that project. But it is going to try to do so this month in the sign of Libra. And of course, a Libra moon is all about being concerned with the awareness of the other people around you at the moment. It's a very conscientious moon. This is an interesting dynamic because you have a moon that's kind of like an Aries moon that just doesn't give a, what, but at the same time, in a Libra sign where it's very conscientious. So this is a little bit of a tense, interesting situation, but it's going to be good overall, I think, because the dispositor Venus giving support to the moon by whole sign trine here and by degree-based trine. You're going to get support from social situations. You're going to get support from artistic endeavors that you're doing. You're going to get support potentially from partners or relationships or social media. All of those things are going to lend support to whatever it is that you're trying to build or get done at the first quarter moon. So I think it's a very, very positive first quarter moon that we're running into this month. So that's really good. All right. Now, if we go forward to July the 7th, there is a square forming between Jupiter and Mercury. Now, Mercury, the god of money and markets and exchange, is in Cancer, a sign that has to do with materiality on some level. So we could be trying to get back to ourselves in some fundamental way, spend time with the family, do something for our kids. There could be some way that we're trying to return to a sense of what's really important to us. And we just don't have the money to do it because there is something out there in the world that is taking up resources, or there is something out there that we're engaged in. There's some activity. So it's like, the kind of like the dad who is just working a lot of late hours and can't get home to see the kids. Or it could be that you want to do something big for the house. You want to get a pool this summer and there just isn't the money to do it. There could be something wrapped up in here with something big that you want to do, something that you want to tackle and start, but there isn't the money, or there just for some reason there isn't cohesion that is lending itself to something beneficial at this time. And there is some conflict because of that, represented by the square between these two planets now. So it's not a tremendously big aspect, so it's going to pass by pretty quick, but it could be, I just think simply it could have something to do with money, money issues is what I'm just mostly feeling. All right. So now coming up on July 10th, we get a pretty dynamic moment here. Over the course of these next 2 days, we get a trine that forms between Saturn and Venus. And we also get, at pretty much at the same time, a square between Neptune and Venus. So because there are 3 planets involved, and it's a little bit more of a complex delineation to make, what I would suggest is take a look at your natal birth chart and put it into a whole sign house configuration. So it's just is simpler. And take a look at these 3 signs that are in your birth chart. See what whole sign house is. So if you were, for instance, an Aquarius rising, like we have in this chart right now, that would mean that Aquarius is taking up that whole first house, and that would be where Saturn was. So now you have Saturn in your first whole sign house, right? And then you would have Neptune in your house of finance and money, and you would have Venus in your house of joy and creativity and children and recreation and fun and romance. So how do we delineate all of these things together? Well, let me just give you just a really easy story. I'm just making this up, right? This is just a story, but Saturn in the first house could represent something that feels like it's dragging you down, either physically, emotionally, mentally, personality-wise. Something about Saturn in your first whole sign house might feel like somehow you're just not able to be a totally 100% yourself, which is forming a trine to Venus. So you have, it doesn't seem good, right? If you can't be yourself, that doesn't sound very fun. So you've got a positive aspect between not feeling good to Venus over here in the 5th house who wants to party. Well, this could be that because you don't feel 100%, because you're not just super, ready to go out there and just be unconstricted or non-constricted or whatever, you end up not overindulging, which is what Venus wants to do in the 5th. So that trine between Saturn and Venus, it becomes a beneficial thing because trines are beneficial aspects in the sense that seemingly potentially depressed or inability to express yourself in an unlimited way, or maybe the health thing that you're dealing with, that keeps you from going out and overindulging. And we bring now Neptune that is forming a square to Venus. And Neptune would normally, if you didn't have that trine back to Saturn, Neptune would be like, hey, in the house of finance and money, let's spend all kinds of money. Let's go out there and blow the bank on, getting a pool and putting it in the backyard. Let's, have a party and invite everybody. We'll pay for all the hors d'oeuvres and it'll be a grand time, right? Let's something with money and recreation or romance, something like that is going to get, with a square, it's going to be something you don't see as potentially being a bad thing or conflictual. And it's Saturn actually being the good guy, even though he may be making you feel like you're not 100% yourself, personality wise or mentally, physically, whatever. So that would be an example of pulling the houses in to understand this dynamic that we're seeing happening around July 10th and 11th. So go through and just see what whole sign houses are being activated by these 3 planets. If you need any help, this is where you could leave a comment in the section below. And actually, it really helps the channel, really helps the algorithm for you guys to leave comments anyway. So I'd really, look forward to seeing what we could find out. You just tell me, oh, I got this in this house and Mercury or whatever in this house. Anytime you guys want to leave a comment, I can always check them and go ahead and throw in a quick delineation. And I may get it wrong. I may get it right. I may miss the bullseye completely, but it'll give you maybe, some sense of how or what kind of topics could be coming up for you for a particular transit. Because when I do these monthly horoscopes, I'm not using houses because I don't know everybody's houses and everybody has different houses. So I have to paint very broad pictures sometimes. And it's always a little bit better just to be able to understand how to plug some of these things into your houses. But definitely leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to go ahead and see if I can give you some suggestions on that. So by July 13th, now we're getting to the full moon. I always like to talk about the full moons because they are the culmination of the entire month, right? It's the fruit of the month. I've been starting to think about doing these monthly horoscopes forecasts as almost like an entire plant. So I would call the month of July, it would be like the Cancer plant, right? The plant starts off as a seed, it grows into a little bush or whatever. And then by the full moon, it's like fruiting or flowering. And then it starts to wither and die down as we prepare to get to the Leo plant. So I've been kind of thinking about these horoscopes as like this plant that like grows and expresses itself. So I like the full moons because this is where we see the fruition of the entire lunar month that is really the total archetype of the sign of Cancer. And within that archetype, what's very fascinating is that we're having a moon in Capricorn. And I'm going to break this down a little bit more philosophically here. The reason why this is interesting is because, again, we start out the month with the moon being the domicile ruler of the sign that it is going through the new moon phase in, with the sun, making that conjunction to the sun, being the host lord to the sun. And that is incredibly unique for the entire year. Every other sign, the moon is going to be hosted by another planet. And so it's going to have to contend with whatever planet is its dispositor for that month as it starts out as the new moon. When it gets to the full moon, the same thing. It's going to have a different dispositor. But in this circumstance, we have the new moon, its own dispositor. But by the time we get to the full moon, this is really interesting. The moon is what we say in ancient Hellenistic language or jargon, as we say that the moon in Capricorn is in detriment or exile or contrariety. So for the lunar cycle that happens in the sign of Cancer, what's really fascinating is that the full moon, the fruition of that month, happens in a sign where the moon itself starts out in its own temple feeling very, very comfortable, but then culminates and fruits, interestingly enough, in a sign where it feels very much the outsider, or at least in a kind of tension with its natural qualities or its natural archetypal desires and behaviors and intentions. So this full moon has quite a bit of tension in it because it's not only in a natural tension with the sun, but it's also in a tension with its just being in its opposite domicile that the moon rules of Cancer, being in Capricorn there. It reminds me of like maybe like if you had a son or a daughter that you had to move and they had to enter a new school district and they were kind of like the outsider, at least until they made some friends, but maybe they couldn't even go to like the same grade that they were previously in at the old school. So like, I don't know, maybe they're super smart, so they like go up a grade. So it's like they're double outsider kind of status at this moment. And that's what this full moon is. I'll give you another example that I thought of. Imagine somebody being from like Iowa, maybe like the Iowa Corn Belt or something, and they're like this wholesome girl next door. The girl next door ends up moving to New York City and then finds herself surrounded by these very high powered female lawyers, where there's just this cutthroat kind of New York action that's happening. That's sort of the sense that the moon finds herself on this full moon. And you can see also that the moon is going to be passing over Pluto shortly after the culmination or the exact opposition to the sun here. So there is kind of a lot of power. You can also see that Mercury is about to go through its final march down to the depths of Hades, down into the deepest level of hell, as he becomes combust and burnt up by the sun before he's reborn there after going through the Kazemi moment. So both of these planets have a lot of power surrounding them. Mercury has the sun, the moon has Pluto. So there is quite a bit of tension. There's quite a bit of contrariety. So this would be another good thing to do, where you look at what is the whole sign house that the full moon is happening in your chart. Like for instance, in this chart, it's happening in the 11th whole sign house here for the sun, Mercury, Kazemi that's coming up, and then the 5th house for the full moon and the Pluto conjunction. So this could be like, perhaps, let's say you're a Capricorn rising. So now you got the full moon in the 1st house, and you've got the sun and Mercury in your 7th house. So this could be something like there's something coming to completion. There's maybe like a deal that you've been working on, and you've been sort of having to really work hard to complete it. And there's some obstacles with other people. You have to almost like you're in a competition, or you're trying to contend with an opponent or something like that. Perhaps it's a legal issue. Perhaps it's an old like an ex-husband or an ex-wife or something, and you're finalizing the litigation for whatever it is. And there's been a little bit of like a competition. And now the moon in your 1st house is going by that Pluto there, and you feel incredibly emotionally powerful about yourself, and you have no room to compromise in the deal. There's no room. You're just going to 100% be all powerful. The emotions are too strong for yourself, and whatever the deal is, it's like there's no compromise. So the tension is just really, really powerful. It's going to pack a punch, I think. So all right, now, so if we pull forward to July the 15th, just past the full moon a couple of days, Neptune begins to trine the sun right as Mercury enters Kazemi. Before Mercury moves on to the heart of the sun, that same degree, it is in a very weak condition, because the sun is simply blinding it, and it's overheating it. It's blowing it up. The sun is too intense. It has too much power. It loses visibility in the sky. And so that is signifying things mercurial are sort of entering the underworld here. They're going down to hell, and they're waiting to be reborn. At this moment, when Mercury finally moves on to the same degree of the sun, the ancients said that this was Mercury moving into the heart of the sun, and there was this protection now from the sun. Mercury goes from this dying place in hell to being reborn. And this is where the rendering, or the alchemical rendering process happens. This is where you get the aha moment. So this is really, really interesting. The whole month, we've just had the full moon. There's the culmination between all this tension between the luminaries. And now, just 2 days later, there is Mercury finally going, oh, I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. But there is also this trine back from Neptune. So what does that mean? Neptune is real alluring. It's like one of those flashy silvery lures that you put on your fish hook and you drop it in the water and the fish goes, oh, what is that? And it swims towards it. That's what Neptune is in Pisces. Neptune is going to give the sun some image that is very irresistible, and the mind is going to be like, ooh, I've got all these ideas. So this is quite a creative moment. Again, go ahead and plug this into the whole sign houses to try to understand what topics are being represented. By July 19th, Mercury enters Leo. This is another fascinating aspect of the month. And I'll tell you why. I was sort of contemplating this. So Mercury goes through this pre-Cazimi phase that is like it's going deeper and deeper into hell. It's going deeper and deeper into the realm of Hades, and it's waiting to be reborn. It moves on to the Cazimi degree of the sun, so it moves into a place where it is protected and enlightened. So the mind becomes crystal clear. Everything begins to form and just be really lucid and understandable. And then right after Mercury pulls out of that Cazimi degree and he's reborn, he then moves into the sun's solar natal house, which of Leo, which is incredible. So it's as if I'm wondering if this means that Mercury is in a prolonged Cazimi moment this month, which would be incredible because Mercury moving into the sign of Leo that is ruled by the sun. And pretty soon, by the 23rd, the sun actually enters Leo. And now Mercury is co-present with the domicile ruler, the sun. Mercury gets to the Cazimi and becomes very enlightened. And then this enlightenment seems to be prolonged by co-presence by the sun entering its own domicile in Leo, and also being still very, very near the sun, and also Mercury just being in Leo, the sun's sign. So this is quite an extended period where Mercury is dealing with the sun in a very positive way. So what does this mean? Mercury likes to think of ideas that has to do with legacy, that has to do with transcendence. So an example of this is, let's say you're Gemini rising. Okay, if you're Gemini rising, so this would be about your third whole sign house. And so there's going to be some transcendence around your everyday rituals that you're doing. You're going to have these aha moments, and it's going to be almost from here on out for the rest of the month. There's going to be really enlightened ideas that are going to be far above average, I believe. And in the third house, it's going to represent something that has to do with your everyday rituals, your everyday habits or environments. And you could potentially have just an incredible like 2-week streak of writing or journaling or talking or social media or hanging out with friends and that you've hanging out with like childhood friends, or going somewhere on a trip to see family or people that are like brothers or sisters to you. There could be something that is really, really special about this moment. So this is just a really, really positive last 2 weeks that we're having in July here, where there's a lot of solar enlightened activity with the mind. And I really, really like that. Okay, now if we go forward now to the 24th, one day later, we've got a square that begins to form between Mars and Mercury here. Typically, a square between Mars and Mercury is going to represent some kind of argument or some kind of dispute, some kind of action that really just shakes things up in a negative way. I would watch out for this. This is going to be a day where there just is going to be the potential to kind of get into conflict with topics or conversations with people. And the reason why I am coming to this conclusion is because we are starting to get Mars very, very, very close to Uranus here, which we're going to talk about in a second. That's kind of the grand finale of the month here. By the 26th, We also begin to see Jupiter making a square to Venus. All right, so let's talk about this. So by June 24th, or back on June 24th, Jupiter and Venus were in that sextile configuration, right? Around that week or so, there may have been something that came up. There may have been something in a relationship. There may have been something that came up just in a social situation, or there was something happening at that time that probably was something you remember that was kind of a big deal, but it seemed to work itself out for the best. This is another time where it seems as if whatever that situation was, it has to be revisited now, and there's going to be a need where we're going to have to bring the topic back up, and maybe there's something that is left unfinished or just needs to be re-talked about and discussed again in order to, you know, put it to rest or to deal with some inner emotions that seem for whatever reasons just be coming up and being kind of difficult at the time. So I think it connects to this trine that we're having in June around the 24th. And I can think of an example. There was a client that I saw over the weekend, and there was some infidelity, and it wasn't that big. It was a very, very minor. It wasn't physical infidelity. It was more like a something that just happened a long time in the past, and it really was a very minor thing. So it was able to be resolved, and the relationship itself was on good terms. So it really wasn't that big, but it nonetheless created kind of a wound, so to speak. This could be a moment where something like that could need to be revisited, re-talked about, hashed out again in order for that wound to maybe go through some kind of healing process at that point. It might have something to do with a loved one or a sister, or I think politically outside in the world, this is definitely going to have to do with the Supreme Court, maybe the Roe versus Wade thing that is going on right now because it happened during that time. So try to look back at the calendar or in the journal and try to see maybe what was happening. It could even be something that is still pretty fresh in your mind, but that is going to have to be probably gone back over, brought back up, rediscussed, and hashed out to some degree. And that is being represented by this square between Jupiter and Venus. So that's what I'm seeing for that one. Now, if we go forward now, we're really getting to the end of the month. We just go to a couple days later. By July 28th, we now get to probably the biggest transit of the month, which is going to be Mars beginning to make that 3-degree range conjunction to Uranus. Uranus also being very close to the North Node. This is a huge aspect. And to really take a little bit deeper of a dive on what this is like, let's just take one thing at a time so it's not too overwhelming. Let's just talk about Mars in Taurus, just to start. So Mars in Taurus, what is Mars in Taurus really like? Well, again, Mars has come from Aries, and this month moved into Taurus. Mars is at home in Aries. Whenever a planet is home, it's as if it has access to behave exactly how it wants to. It doesn't have to ask permission. So it's kind of like if you're home and you need to go to the garage and grab a hammer, you know where your hammer is. You know, if you're hungry, you go to the refrigerator. But if you're at somebody else's house and you know you got to do something, you might have to ask them. They might not have it. It might not be the tool you're used to using. Whatever it is, it's not quite as comfortable. You're not quite able to just be or do exactly the natural things that you could normally do if you were in your own home, or in this case, Mars being in Aries. Mars being in Taurus is a little bit like frustrated. Mars wants to do very Marsy things, but Taurus is a place that Mars finds himself that is contrary to his natural behavior because Taurus is ruled by Venus. So Venus is a planet that wants harmony and love and beauty and aesthetics and art and creativity. And Mars just wants to mess stuff up and break things and go to war and bloodshed. So some blending of these two, when Mars is in Taurus, Mars can be passive aggressive. Mars can be unsure about how to do the things that it wants to do. It can be a bully. It can be
kind of that personality that just tries not to ruffle, but somehow just ruffles, even though they don't want to. If they're trying to get something done, if they're trying to enact their will out there in the world, no matter what they do, it could be that it's just hard not to ruffle somebody's feathers because you're trying to be too passive. You're a little bit unsure. You're not very confident in it. For whatever the reason, there is a weird, awkward kind of ability for Mars to just be Marsy. Mars likes to be Marsy without thinking about it. Doesn't want to think about the consequences. Just wants to do it. Just punch them. Just go. That's the way Mars is. Mars in Taurus has to think about aesthetics and beauty and people's emotions. Another thing that's very interesting is Taurus can be a planet that has a lot of ambition, but the ambition is sort of this steady climb towards something beautiful or successful. When Mars gets in there, this ambition can really ramp up to almost like a bulldozer kind of bullyish or overpowering, over aggressive kind of way. So this is the energy that we're seeing with Mars as Mars moves all month long towards Uranus. We're going to bring now some of the Uranian qualities into Mars dealing with being in the sign of Taurus right now. So what is it like now when you have Uranian qualities mixed with this sort of passive aggressive, with this potentially bulldozer or ruffling kind of personality that's just trying to do things and doesn't quite understand how to do it without ruffling some feathers? What do we get with Uranus? Well, the low-hanging fruit word that everybody uses for Uranus that's actually kind of annoying to me because I never like to hear people reduce a planet down to literally like one word. Planets are spectrum archetypes. They mean many things. They have to because they're representing an archetype. So let's talk about Uranus as discovery. Let's talk about Uranus as math. Let's talk about Uranus as freedom. This could be a time where you're just going to break free because there's a situation where you're trying to do something and it's just, no matter how you try to be careful of doing it without causing conflict or having it be awkward or ruffling some feathers, stepping on some toes. It's almost like at this moment, you're just like, F it, I'm just going to break free and do it anyway. So it's something like that. Now, you also have the North Node very close to Uranus, and the North Node tends to increase things. So this is a big, giant, did you save any fireworks from the 4th? Because here's one right now. This is a big firework. So you're going to have to be really careful around this time. There is also, you can see here, there's also a square, which is awesome. Sarcastically speaking, between these 3 points in Taurus to Mercury here in Leo. So all of this energy is sort of being directed at Mercury, thinking it knows exactly how to be individualized. So this is a moment of like extreme individuation. You got Mars, which likes to be individual. You've got Uranus, which likes to be individual. You've got Mercury and the sun and the new moon happening in Leo. Leo is a sign that is very individualistic. This is a lot of individualistic stuff. So I think we're going to have to be very careful at this time not to just basically, this could be a moment where it doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter what's going on. You don't want to be bogged down at this moment. And, it could be just a break free moment. It could be a discovery moment. There could be a new discovery in Mars-like things. You could be having a little bit of difficulty trying to figure out how to get something done, but then you have this breakthrough, brilliant moment where you understand exactly how to cut something out of a situation in order to get deeper. And the project just miraculously becomes finished at that point because you're able to just go bam, and there's just one missing puzzle piece and you figure it out and boom, it's done. But yeah, this is a big firework right at the end of the month. And then essentially we have the new moon in Leo that is happening on July the 28th. Like I have been doing for the last couple of monthly horoscopes, we're going to save this new moon for the beginning of the astrology for August 2022, because that really is the beginning of the lunation cycle, which is the foundational aspects that we want to look out for the horoscope of the month. So this is what I'm seeing for the month of July. This is a lot of powerful aspects in this month. So I'm really interested to see how this month goes. I hope everything goes really great for you, and be safe. Let's have some fun this month with some of these aspects. Let's be careful not blowing off some fingertips. And let me know how it goes in the comment section below. Please like and subscribe the video. And yeah, I'll see you all again real soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.